Hello, AB Path to Sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, hello, everybody out there in YouTube land and those that are in our secret Facebook group who are listening to tonight's live stream, another episode of Sober Distancing. That's such a clever phrase. Anyway, I'm so smart. Anyway, it's nice to be here with you guys, sharing another Friday evening, and it's good to see you here again. Angela, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Got some allergies and stuff going. The trees are still trying to kill me, but we're hanging in there. So
Good. Well, I'm going to be getting ready to take some time off work this coming week, and I'm looking forward to that, just to see something other than my immediate neighborhood, to get on my bicycle and ride around town. And I'm just kind of looking forward to breaking the routine. I really felt like I needed to do that. So that'll be good.
Fun.
So why don't we kind of, before we get into today's topic, which I think is going to be an interesting one, it's kind of heavy, adverse childhood experiences and addiction. And it has a lot to do with, what is alcoholism, what is addiction, and how does our past childhood experiences influence that. Angela knows a lot more about the subject than I do. I just read this article basically, but Angela's read a few books and has participated in some seminars and so forth. So she knows what she's talking about. But why don't we kind of touch base, Angela, about how we are doing personally and our groups during this time. How's your group been faring since you've gone to meeting online?
It's been doing well. So the majority of our home group members attend our online meetings. One of the things that I've mentioned here that we discovered pretty quickly is that people wanted an additional meeting a week. So we used to be just a Tuesday night group that met at the Unitarian Fellowship, and now we're doing 2 Zoom meetings, so Tuesday night and Thursday night at 7 p.m. And so, the Tuesday night group has been fairly large, averaging about 28 to 36 people.
Wow.
And so that's the one that has the majority of our previous face-to-face home group members.
Mm-hmm.
And then Thursday, we have a lot of people from different states and people in other counties in Idaho that Zoom in for that one. And so, so it's kind of cool. We're definitely going to keep that one going because we've made such good friends with these people, and it feels like, an additional home group. And so, we're looking forward to keeping that, long after the face-to-face goes back, because it is helpful also for people who are working or who have kids that can't always jump in their car and drive across town and do all of that kind of stuff. So it's been a great thing for us. There's a few people that haven't joined the Zoom revolution, but we're still keeping in touch with them via email or phone calls or things like that. So our group seems to be doing well as far as I can tell.
We've had a couple of new people join the group, brand new to sobriety. First AA meeting was our online Zoom meeting. I find that really interesting. And some of them hopefully will join us when we meet in person. I don't know when that will be. But have you guys had any newcomers?
We've had a couple of them. The other thing is we have probably about, I'd say about 8 maybe, that are people who joined shortly before the meeting stopped down. So we have several members that are newer in sobriety, so doing the 2 months and 3 months and things like that. And so, so that's pretty great. I think that we get a lot from them, and they're getting a lot from us through this. And so it's kind of cool.
Right. So, shall we dig into the topic tonight?
All right, let's do this.
Okay, now I'm going to rely on you. I kind of consider you the expert here. I read the article. I did find it very interesting, and I'm going to kind of, I guess,
Well, first, why
Frank,
don't you
go
share
ahead.
what you
That's
found
okay. What I think
interesting in the
about it. Okay.
article? Yeah, because I sent you the article and I'm like, well, we could consider this and we could consult this doctor. We could do this, and you're like, oh, let's just talk about it. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
then.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
I
So
probably could have
share.
called Dr. Baker, and he probably would have done it on short notice, but I don't know.
Yeah, no,
So,
it's cool. I mean, it's one of these things that, we're just gonna go over kind of the basics
yeah,
here. I mean, not even all of what ACEs is, because
right.
it's such a vast topic, and
Yeah.
there's so much, to know and to learn and to understand about it. But our main thing was talking about it as it pertains to addiction theory, and whether or not people still believe that alcoholism and addiction is a biological illness,
Mhm.
or is it something else? So anyway, go ahead and share what you thought what
Okay,
you thought of
and
the
I'm going to come
article.
back with you on a question on that too. So
Okay.
remind
So
me.
can we post what the article is?
Yeah, I did post a link to it on both
Okay,
the Facebook group and in the
great.
YouTube channel, and I can actually post another link into, and you can too actually if you want to
Okay.
post a link into the chat there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So for those who haven't heard either of that, it's the article is on a website called ACEs Too High, and it's basically a website that's associated with another website called ACEs Connection, and it's basically dedicated to the research of adverse childhood experiences, developments in it, epidemiology, neurobiology, biomedical, all of that kind of stuff, and what communities and individuals and groups and agencies are doing to try to help mitigate it and help people who have experienced it. So, and the article was titled "Adoption." No, just kidding. Addiction Doc says it's not the drugs, it's the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So this is what I got from that article, and I thought it was interesting. First of all, the whole idea of what addiction is anyway, and in the article, it kind of defined addiction as just ritualized compulsive comfort seeking. And it's a normal response to experiences that we've had in childhood, traumatic experiences that we've had in childhood. And I didn't really see anything in in that statement at all that would differ from anything that I ever understood. From when I went through the 12 steps, and particularly in steps 4 and 5, and learned about my past. I could see that. So anyway, and then it talks about how this is treated, and that would be by one thing I found interesting was actually just changing the comfort seeking behavior from one that's unhealthy to one that's healthy. And that's something oftentimes I hear derided in the rooms, that, you shouldn't trade one addiction for another one.
Mhm.
But I guess you could if it's a healthy one, like exercising or reading or something like that. But to change a behavior like that, and also to treat people individually in therapy and also in group therapy. Also encouraging people to participate in 12-step programs or any other type of group where they could associate with other people and have some sense of community and so forth. Treating people with respect was a big one. Really listening to people and allowing them to integrate their own customs into their treatment. And I don't know, and then actually trying to deal with the actual experiences from their childhood itself. And I found that interesting too, because oftentimes when you think about when I would think about trauma in childhood, I might think that maybe I didn't experience a lot of trauma, that my family was fairly normal, other than a mentally ill mother, and and so forth. But when I really stop and look at it, and I did through my fourth step, I could see that there was a lot of instability in my household. So in my case, I never knew what I was going to get on any given day. I didn't know if I was going to have a peaceful household where there would be laughter and love in the house, or if I was going to have one of those days where mom was crazy, or one of those days when dad came home really angry because I did something and would get beaten for it.
Mhm.
It was that kind of a life that I lived, and so I was always on edge. And I can even remember well into adulthood when I would be sitting in my apartment, and when I would hear a slamming of a car door, I would brace, like because it reminded me of this of my father coming home and closing the, and I could hear him close the door of his car, and I would get immediately tense. And so even well into my adulthood, when I would hear a closing door of a car, I would, I'd get all tensed up, like bracing myself for something. So there was definitely trauma in my childhood. You know, that's just a fact. And I never really thought about it when I was drinking, that my drinking was a response to that trauma. But when I look back at my history, and I learned this when I was going through the steps, my drinking started pretty early in life. I mean, when I was, God, I was probably 8, 9 years old, I think, when I had my first drink, Angela. And when I had
Mhm.
that drink, I knew immediately that it gave me a feeling that I needed. It gave me
Mhm.
some comfort. Like it says in this article, it was it gave me comfort, and I started to seek that comfort out. So it kind of makes sense to me. But the question I was going to ask you, you talked about the people who don't like the idea that addiction isn't a disease. Well, why can't it be both? Why can't it be us okay, finding a drug or a behavior that brings us comfort, but also causes us harm. And doesn't it also at the same time kind of change your brain so that your brain is now has been impacted by this? So can it be kind of both?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that when I'm thinking about the ACEs, and thinking about the addiction model, some of the things that I have difficulty with the addiction model is that it seems to me that people feel that it's like completely out of their control, like it's genetic in a way that you can't do anything about it. And so that's where I have some disagreement if that's the way the person is talking about it. The plus with the addiction model, or the illness or disease model, I guess it is that at least nowadays you can be treated. So if it's considered a disease of some sort, then oftentimes insurance and other things, you can get help. Whereas if it's not considered that, then people can be denied the help that they need
Mm,
to deal with it. So but within the rooms is what I was thinking about too. Oftentimes we hear that that I have an allergy, and that
mm,
to alcohol, biologically and such. And so that's one way that people are really identified with it. And I think that ACEs, at least to me, has brought something different to consider. And yes, they do, from my understanding of the different studies, believe that that adverse childhood experiences does change your neurobiology, but that our compulsive behaviors are the brain's way to deal with that, and that they're normal considering what we were dealing with. So the ritualized compulsive comfort seeking is the way that somebody who's been through that kind of experience would react. And so it normalizes it a little bit and takes away the shame or guilt or any of the other stigmatized things that we often feel and that are sometimes still um, used in 12-step recovery as a way to, change your behavior, that it's still kind of a moral failing type thing. And so for me, ACEs, helped with that, at least in an understanding of, okay, yeah, my way of dealing with this is natural given what I've been through. But there is also, I know a lot of people who said that they don't have trauma in their childhood. Their parents were fine, and so yet they became alcoholic. And so with that,
brings us to Johnny's question. Do you see Johnny's question there? What qualifies as a bad experience or condition in childhood as a trauma? Does it have to be abuse or something of that level?
That is, debated about, of course. But if you go to some of the ACEs and trauma-informed websites, a lot of things can be considered trauma. So, what I was thinking about with the people who haven't experienced specific trauma that they can think of, it's usually, or it can be, something as simple as that maybe their parents were young when they were conceived, and the mother was more stressed than other mothers about, the birth, or something could have happened at birth, a particularly difficult birth that may have caused, some change neurobiologically. And so, it doesn't necessarily mean or need to be that your parents, were horrible people or your caregivers or anything like that. There are a lot of different things, that will go into the ACEs. But I can read over the basic list that the Kaiser Permanente, I believe it was, and CDC put out. And so this study was done, I think, in the 90s, and it had 300 members. And so the questions that were asked then were based on the answers that group gave that were common. And so, newer studies and newer versions of the ACEs have been out, as well as like resilience questionnaires and things like that. And so the later ones take into account more things like, where you grew up, ethnicity, gender, racism, and things like that. So quickly, the first one is: did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? And so, these, with questions like that one, what might scare me or make me feel humiliated might not for somebody else, so that's where, some of those little distinct differences can come in. Number two, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Number three, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt or have actual oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Number four, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you and or thought that you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Number five, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Number six, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Number four, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes, often, or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife? 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or used street drugs? 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And 10, did a household member go to prison?
Yeah.
And so those were like the basic ones that they started out with. There's, ones now that are a little more refined,
Yeah.
and inclusive, and do different things, or give,
And like
include more.
and like most things in life, it runs on a spectrum. So you can
Yeah.
have, like Jackie was pointing out that you just when you were as a kid, your parents had a divorce, and if that was the only question that you answered yes on, then your score is one. So it's low on the score. It's low
Hmm.
on the scale, but you still have experienced that. When I took that test, I scored a 3.
Hmm.
And so that's fairly high. But they said in the article that if you were 4, your your chances of having an addiction at a score of 4 were much, much higher, I guess, than
Yeah,
yeah.
that was one of the things when I was reading it, that they a lot of the different correlations that they've been able to make now, are with people who have 4 or more. So like with 4 or more, it doubles the risk of heart disease and cancer in people, and it increases your risk of becoming alcoholic by 700%. And so, all of the studies that are coming out, they were surprised because many of them were actually health, so heart disease and lung disease and diabetes and things like that. And so they could, most of them understand how some of this connections could be made between addictive and, parents who are cruel, things
Mhm.
like that, or mental health going that way. But the physical health was what was unusual to them, and new in the 90s. And so yeah, so with the ACEs, it's very high that you know if you have 4 or more, that you're going to become addicted to something. And so what I liked about this article, or what was interesting, was the way that he rephrased addiction. We hear a lot of different phrases now. I know several people that don't say that they're alcoholic when they're introducing themselves in a
Mhm.
meeting. They
Mhm.
say, I can't drink alcohol safely, or
Mhm.
I am alcohol free, or
Mhm.
things like that.
I hear
So
that more and more all the time.
yeah. So that's totally normal, in our world, I guess, in
Mhm.
our secular AA meetings. But I really liked that he just changed it all together into the what is it, ritualized compulsive comfort seeking.
Mhm.
Because when I think back on my life, that's mainly what I did.
Yeah.
So as
Yeah.
I've spoke before in this
Exactly.
podcast, food was my first thing that was a ritualized compulsive comfort seeking behavior.
Yep.
And then when I was done with food, then it was alcohol. And then when I was done with alcohol, it was AA.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
I go to AA every single day, multiple meetings,
Mhm.
and I got a sponsor, and I'd call people, and I was of service, and I did all of the stuff, ritualistically and compulsively at times. Like if I didn't know what to do with myself, or I had a feeling run amok, that I couldn't get a hold of my sponsor, I go to a meeting. That's what you're supposed to do. You go to a meeting. So sometimes I went to a meeting even when I wasn't planning to go to a meeting. And so, is that good or bad? I think with what this doctor is talking about is that, it's a compulsive, a ritualized compulsive seeking behavior that won't kill me or put me in
Right.
jail.
Right. Right.
And so, like you said about that, I agree that oftentimes, we talk about other addictions, or going to
Mhm.
different things as being negative, and in the long run, that probably is because in my doing that, I wasn't necessarily addressing whatever was bugging me. I
Mhm.
ran to a meeting, but on the other hand, I didn't have the tools to address what was bugging me, so I ran to the meeting. And now I might make a different choice because I have more tools, and I've gone through additional therapy,
Yeah.
and I understand myself better in a way that I couldn't in early sobriety. And so that's where, I think that it's not a negative thing.
Right.
It might be if continue to only use that. But ideally, I think for most of us, we want to, get tools, start to get used to them and use them, and then continue to develop tools. That's kind of what, 11 and 12 in our steps are about.
Gail
Um,
has mentioned something here that's kind of an interesting thing about this too. She says that she was raised by non-drinking parents who married very young, but both were raised by alcoholic fathers, and they both suffered consequences of that upbringing. And what I think is interesting about that is it shows how the trauma can be passed from one generation to another, that it can be generational as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I think that they're currently, or I've heard it called legacy
Mhm.
trauma, and
Mhm.
yeah, and some of the therapies I've heard that work well with that are the internal family systems, self-directed leadership therapy,
Yep.
and I believe Dr. Bessel van der Kolk talks about it quite a bit, and he's the author of The Body Keeps the Score. And
Mhm.
so there are several modalities in that book that he talks about that are helpful for working with legacy traumas as well. But yeah, that's a newer one, within the community, the trauma community,
Yeah.
that people are talking about. And for some people, it still sounds a little bit out there, but they are doing more and more research to
Mhm.
prove that, yeah, that this is a thing and
Oh,
something to
yeah.
be working on. So,
Yeah, I had the same experience, Gail had. I learned so much from the fourth and fifth step, but when I did that and I looked at my parents, I could see, knowing what I knew about their lives. My father's father died when my dad was like 8 years old. My mother's father committed suicide. Hell, they grew up in the Great Depression. It was just a hard life for them.
mhm.
So they were poor. My mother was very poor. So they really had a difficult time, and they were doing the best they could. And I understood when I did that fourth step,
Mhm.
how much I had in common, particularly with my mother, and that I really was able to, understand her. I wouldn't ever really use the word forgiveness. Like I don't really think she needed that, but I really understood, I guess, why she was the way she was, and it helped me just having that understanding, I guess. But it was definitely a generational thing. I mean, she she inherited from her father this depression and suicide thing
Mhm.
that she passed on to me, you know,
Right.
in our
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
So,
And it's the same for ours as well. My grandfather on my mother's side committed suicide, and my mother has been hospitalized for suicidal ideology and tendencies, and as have I in my early 20s. And so,
mhm.
whether they intended to or not, that stuff does get passed down. But it's not always, as visible. The other thing I liked about that article is that he does talk. I think he's quoting from Dr. van der Kolk when he mentions that there are the things that we can cognitively see and know and learn, and then there's the things that we don't, like the smell of somebody's cologne. Might trigger
Mhm.
us if we were,
Mhm.
things like that. Unpleasant experiences that our body still can remember,
Yep.
but we don't know about. Why do we get a stomach ache every time we go, into this building? Things like
Yep.
that. And so there's a lot in there. And one of the reasons I thought it was important to bring up is that I know for me that I've done a lot of step work and I've done a lot of therapy and things like that. And yet sometimes it can feel frustrating when I feel like, I'm either on a plateau or like, I'm not handling things as well as I want to, or lashing out at people or doing some things. And this learning, some of this stuff reminds me that there's a lot going on with this, Angela thing that I'm inhabiting, and
Mhm.
that it's okay, that I don't, there isn't a perfect practice of mindfulness. There isn't a perfect program to work in AA. There isn't perfect therapy, stuff like that. And so I thought it was important to bring that up. And also, if anybody's listening and goes to check out their ACEs and feels a little bit, has some feelings about it, then I would highly recommend that you talk to somebody about it, because I know for me it was a little bit frustrating. One of my first experiences with it was watching a PBS special about it, and then also watching the documentary Resilience, and I cried several times because my AA score is an 8. And so all I saw was the stuff on how, I'm more likely to die 10 years earlier and have all of these different health problems, as well as, my mental health and my addiction tendencies and all of that, but on the other hand, I do have a lot of resilience. I have a lot of things that I've changed in my life. I'm very healthy person as far as what I eat. And, I stopped using and drinking, in my early 30s. And so, so there are a lot of things that I've been able to do and understand that changes that. And now I'm continuing to work on the connections between my mind and the way that I think about things and the neural pathways and how it relates to my body, so that I can release any of the toxic stress, release any of the trauma that is still being held by my body. So,
well, I did a podcast once with Dr. Nicole Labor, and she's an addiction doctor, and she was talking about how step work in particular helps create new neural pathways that kind of strengthens our brain. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't quite understand it, but I do get it. I mean, it's like we can retrain our brain. Our brain is an organ, and I guess it just reacts to our environment and what we put into it. And by practicing, healthy behaviors and maybe just changing the way we're thinking, we start creating more these neurons, I guess, that are more helpful to us.
Right. Yeah. No, neuroplasticity is amazing, and it's definitely a saving grace, I guess, for those of us who are not religious. But yeah, the mind is a very powerful thing, and so with neuroplasticity, we can learn to use different neural pathways. We can retrain our brain from, these ideas and these things that we did, or the beliefs that we held. So, like when we go through the fourth step and do a fifth step, we start to see all of these things that we believe to be true, either about our past or the world in general, or how we behaved, or, things like that. And then we're able to cognitively see that, maybe that's not exactly what happened, or maybe I could think about it in a different way. And so that's kind of a basic way of doing that. But for the stuff that's really, really hard and really ingrained, EMDR therapy is really good for that. And again, the internal family systems is really good for that. And then there are other, things that people are doing, other studies and research and programs like, the MDMA and psychedelics. That is, they had stopped doing that research because of those crazy hippies. And now, they're back to doing the research on it. And I know Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is doing some of that in his trauma research now, looking at that and how that can help to change the neural pathways, and so that's all exciting stuff. So we're not stuck because of our childhood or because of our experiences. And I agree. In our conversation, live comments, it looks like there's some discussion on big T and little T trauma. And so like big T trauma is, of course, being beaten or in a major accident or witnessing somebody being hurt or things like that. Little T trauma might be kind of like the kid that put the tacks on my chair, in grade school, and not only did it physically hurt, but then I was embarrassed and felt ashamed and like everyone hated me and stuff like that. That's kind of a small T trauma, or what most people would consider a small T trauma. To me, of course, it was trauma. But yeah, those are kind of some of the or being shamed in front of people, in front of a class. You had mentioned something about how teachers handled things when you were in school.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
it was you would so if you misbehaved, they would bring you in front of the class and they take a paddle out and they would beat you basically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was humiliating.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about that when I read the article. I don't believe that I ever actually got that got, got beaten like that, but I saw others get
Right.
it, you know?
Yeah.
Ah, Jesus. And
That
so you
stuck
just
with
live
you.
in fear of that,
Yeah.
in school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's crazy. As Joe said, it
yeah.
was a ruler. And in my case, it was actually a paddle. It's like teachers actually had these paddles that they would hang the damn things on their blackboard.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Call us, if you will, please, at 844-899-8278. Is that the right number? Yeah, it is. 844-899-8278. We'd love to hear from you. We're talking about adverse childhood experiences and addiction. And,
Yeah.
Angela, you thought that this might be a controversial topic, but you know what? I think most of the people that are at least listening to this podcast right now through and
Hmm.
YouTube and so forth seem to think that it's right on. I mean, people are saying that the definition seems to make sense. They're
Yeah.
all relating different traumas that they've had in their
Hmm.
lives. Um,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
think it
cool.
kind of works pretty well. And also,
Yeah.
someone else, I don't know if you've heard of this book, but someone from the Facebook group is recommending a book. Dr. Jamie Merrick, is that how you pronounce that? Has a book.
Mm.
It's a new edition of her book, Trauma and the 12 Steps. It's going to come
Oh,
out.
no, I have not heard of that. So cool.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Joe,
Well, not for people. For those of you listening in for the first time, yeah, we should probably qualify that neither of us are trained in any way on any of the stuff we're talking about. We're both just people who are in recovery that like to talk.
that's
And
right.
and so yeah, so one of the running jokes is that my hobby is trauma, and that I just find it fascinating, and based on my own experience and those of others as well. And so I really like to read books that talk about trauma and addiction and yeah, things like that, as well as mental health. I think that there's some interesting things to say about the diagnoses that we get, that if we address the developmental trauma we had, we might not have that, or it would affect it in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. Heidi Juniper, she says, a perspective I am really drawn to comes from trauma therapist Bonnie Badenoch. It's her
Okay.
mentor, which has to do with understanding the brain, co-regulation, and how accompaniment can help.
Hmm.
So why don't you call us, Heidi? Tell us more about that. I would love to have someone call us. That's the
Yeah.
most fun.
Well, and yeah, we haven't heard from Jackie. I mean, I think
And
one of
Jackie's
these,
out
I
there.
mean, do we have to call her? Do we have to phone a friend?
Yeah.
You know?
But anyway, so yeah, cool. I get kind of lost sometimes when I start reading through the comments. It's fun to see so many people out there, though. We've got 26 people actually watching the live stream right now,
Oh,
so that's
nice.
kind of nice. Thank you, everybody, for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Cool. I think what I'm reading with Heidi is, I don't know that I've heard that specific approach, but I think in internal family systems, the self-directed leadership, it's kind of similar in the, I guess having a different part of you, usually with a therapist, go back and start to look at some of those traumas, and you basically are using the adult self to go back and witness what the child self or the younger self is trying to show you
hmm,
about a certain situation. And so in doing that, you can relieve the burden that child self is still holding on to. And then it can go and do something else, and your body starts to then your entire system, mental, physical, all of that, starts to trust that in who you are now, and that you are, well, most of us are adults that can actually handle situations and keep us safe. And so, yeah, so that's one of the therapies that I know exist. Another one is with couples, and I can't remember what it's called at the moment, but it's where a therapist takes the couples into some of these traumatic scenes from one of their childhoods, and the partner then is there to witness, basically what their partner has to say about what happened to them, and then acts as kind of like the heavy in the situation to either beat up on the person that was beating up on them, or remove that person or whatever, act as a protector. And so even though it's all stuff that technically is imaginary that we're talking about, it does change something within a person's brain, and sometimes offers relief. So
got a caller. I love it. Hello, how are you? Hello. Hello, can you hear me? Oh, didn't work.
You scared them away. You were a little too excited. Yeah.
I wonder if the person from the Facebook book who's making comments about adoption and so forth, is that David B. Lowell?
Yeah.
If it is, why don't you call us and tell us a little bit about adoption and how that impacts people's
I was able to sit in on his discussion at the last International Conference of Secular AA, and I passed on his book to a friend of mine who was also adopted, and she hadn't heard anybody else's story ever of being in recovery or addiction.
Again, we'll try to see if it works this time. Hello, how are you?
Hello, this is Heidi.
Oh, hi, Heidi. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Heidi.
Yeah. Hey, so I feel like I was listening to the feed, and I think my feed might be a few seconds behind our conversation.
It is. There's a little bit of a delay. I don't know why they do that, but there is a delay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So, so I paused that so it wasn't so distracting.
Yeah.
Hey, guys. So, Angela, hello.
Hello.
I think, and it's Angela and John. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes. And you had suggested, John, that I should call in?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I wanted you to call in because I thought you were making some pretty intelligent comments out there, and I just thought that you might have something that you'd like to share on the topic.
Well, my comment, I'm so relating to what you're saying, and I'm so excited to be hearing Angela's voice, since we went to high school together, but haven't been so connected in a long time. And so ironically, I'm calling long distance to talk to a person who lives a few miles from me.
It's true.
But I'm just finding it so exciting, all these things you're talking about, Bester Van Cock and IFS, and integrating memories in that way by revisiting them through that internal family systems process. And the things that I was referencing, and I'm not a therapist, I'm just very, very interested in this process. So I'm offering my understanding, but not any kind of certified and clinical training about it. So it's just, I guess Angela was saying that she has this is kind of a hobby or an interest. So it's, it's a really serious hobby, but I'm definitely not a professional of that sort. It seems like an important caveat to offer, but my mentor is a trauma therapist, and she talks a lot about how traumas get embedded and how they can stay sort of unresolved, and then how we are able to ultimately integrate them. And her perspective is from the interpersonal neurobiology perspective, which is kind of a clunky term, I would say, but it really focuses on interpersonal stuff, on relational stuff. So her perspective is that a lot of what trauma consists of is feeling a lot of fear and pain in the moment and not being able to process it. And that a really important component of that is whether or not you're having support with the people around you to process it.
Yeah.
And that applying both to the moment that the trauma is embedded, and then also when we're older, having support. I mean, I think she would say a big part of why like meetings are really powerful is that there's a part of the memory that's still active in our bodies. Like it's, even though we factually know it's over, our bodies, there's a part of our bodies that doesn't know. But having support and accompaniment now can heal and resolve that. And I think that's based on memory reconsolidation work by Ecker et al.
Yeah.
That makes
Well,
sense.
yeah, and I think that doctor from the article was saying something similar, that like any sort of group therapy where you can share similar experiences with other people is, is helpful. So, there's safety in numbers is what I'm hearing from what you say.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for calling, Jackie, or not Jackie.
Heidi.
I'm Heidi. I find myself looking at the Facebook, the feed all the time. Anyway, but thank you for calling. I'm going to take another caller if you don't mind. We've got two people waiting, which is so exciting.
It's a delight to talk to you.
Oh, so nice to talk
it's
to
really
you.
great. I love the topic. Thanks.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks,
Sure.
Heidi.
Bye.
So cool.
Let's see who this might be. Hello.
Hello, John and Angela. This is David Bull calling.
I thought that
Hi,
was you out
David.
there.
Doing a wonderful show.
There was somebody out there talking about
I
adoption.
couldn't help myself. Well, I was delighted to happen upon it. I for some reason did not see any advance notice of it, and I am so delighted that you're both talking about this, because it is so important, as you've identified, from any number of aspects, not the least of which is the fact that there are lots of people in our midst looking for support in the rooms that we hang out in who have these traumas, and they don't always know how to address them in that group setting. And as was mentioned during the last caller, there are also some situations that make it very difficult for people to feel safe, right? So what we really need to do is whatever the therapy is, whether it's exposure therapy, whether it's Bessel van der Kolk's approaches, whether it's that family systems type therapy, it's key to provide an environment of safety and of validation to the individual seeking that, whether they really know they're looking for that or not. And sometimes, as we know, we don't always feel comfortable in every support group room we walk into. So we have to be really mindful of that. And yes, I was the one who had commented on Dr. Jamie Marich's book. It's actually a second edition. She wrote the book some years ago, probably close to 10 years ago, and it's excellent. It's excellent, and it reinforces much of what you're talking about, but also forms a great guide for people with trauma trying to navigate 12-step fellowships, and particularly some of the literature, especially that contained in the big book.
Yeah. Or that's still talked about
that,
in meetings and stuff. A lot of the stuff that is still either shaming or relies upon, that in meetings. So that's cool. I'll look forward to seeing that.
Exactly.
And David,
well, people who are traumatized. Go ahead, John.
Oh no, I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it probably won't come as any surprise to generalize that people who have been traumatized oftentimes have difficulty with the very concept of powerlessness. And they've been manipulated, or they've been abused, or they've been psychologically derailed somewhere throughout their lifetime, and to be told that they're also powerless because of their addiction causes some real problems for an individual walking into the door. Because a lot of the therapies that Angela was talking about are about empowerment. They're about self-empowerment. And that oftentimes is not the view that some people are learning when they walk into the doors of some fellowship. So that's very difficult. And in particular, what can be very dangerous to some is that old spiritual axiom. When there's something wrong, there's something wrong with me. That's a very difficult message to impart upon people who come into the rooms with trauma. That would be very ill-advised in many cases to do that. So we have to be very careful, and we have to offer, to whatever degree, that appropriate therapy that Angela was talking about, and a safe place for people to process these emotions. My particular experience is both personal. I'm a relinquishee. I was relinquished at birth and adopted shortly thereafter, and I'm a person in long-term recovery from alcoholism. And I got into the business of alcoholism and addiction treatment and didn't realize how important knowing about this trauma history of relinquishees, orphans, fostered individuals was. And now that I'm in the business, I can tell you that the people who come to us are hugely representative when they've had these relinquished experience early on, just like people with trauma are. So and what a great conversation you're having. I'm delighted. Thanks for bringing this to the people's awareness, because it's something we strive to do. We talk about the newcomer, but it's also that newcomer with trauma that we have to be very well aware of.
David, one of these days we're going to have you back on this live stream to talk about your book. too, because I love that book. In that book, in Parallel Universes, you talk about your growing up and how, as an adoptee, you always knew you were an adoptee, and you always thought it was a positive thing because your parents told you how great it was that they chose you, that you were adopted. And then one day, I think you were maybe 5 years old, and you were walking with some friends, and you were so proud that you were adopted, and you told them this, and they looked at you like there was something wrong with you. And from that moment on, it was a struggle for you. And from that moment on, that's when I guess you realized the trauma. Am I reading that right?
I think, I'm honored that you remember the detail. But yes, I was 6 years old. I was in fact hanging with a couple of friends. And
Yep.
yes, I did tell them proudly. And it was right then and there that I realized how fragile trust is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the very people who I loved and adored and who raised me
Yeah.
must have been lying to me. They were
That's
telling me
right.
it was cool all along to be adopted,
Yep.
when in fact these people were my friends were treating me like a pariah.
Yep.
So there was a disconnect there, right?
Yep.
There was something that was not in my reality right there that caused me to be hyper vigilant and to, I guess, hyper analyze everything over a series of time. And as you suggested before, I believe that my alcoholism stemmed from that as a learned behavior, right? I happened upon alcohol, and it became this magical medication to an illness that I didn't even know I had. And that illness was disconnection, shame, all the things that go along with the trauma that's associated with that. And I learned that it was a way to check out and to numb that pain. Absolutely. Yes, it's inherently a disease too, because you've read my book, you know that I have a deep family history of alcoholism and addiction, and there's some mental health in my genetic line as well. But yes, absolutely. Thanks
It's
for
a great
up.
book. It's a great book. Will you come back sometime and talk to us on this?
I'd
this
enjoy
live
that
stream?
very much.
Let's definitely do it. I'll send you an
That'd
email.
be
We can
great.
arrange
Very
that.
much.
Okay. Well, let's take another call.
Excellent.
Thank you for calling, Dave. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and thanks, Angela.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Let's see who this might be. Hello.
Hi, this is Michelle.
Oh, hey,
from
Michelle.
Baltimore.
Michelle
Hi,
from
Don and
Baltimore.
Angela. How you doing?
Good. Nice to hear you.
Yeah. Jackie texted me like, "Oh no, you should call in." So I will today. Might as well. I'm a recovering alcoholic, but also a social worker, and I was just kind of sitting here, a little struck. Graduated from grad school less than 15 years ago, and my track was child maltreatment. And we touched on trauma, but when I got into the field, Angela, you're talking about like different treatment modalities. We really were just referring to. I mean, I'm working with alcoholics and addicts, but then a lot of folks that have a history of trauma, and I'm referring to just general therapists and CBT at the time. And really in the last 10 years, the education has been so much better. And I got to go to an international child maltreatment conference in San Diego, and they had a whole day on ACEs. And my mind was just blown. How I've used it in my practice is as like a psychoeducational tool for parents that I'm working with, because like you're saying, we don't even know that these are a lot of the traumas add up. And then when we can talk to them about their long-term health, but then also mental health as well. I mean, it was amazing at the time. And so it's really, really changed. And when I got into recovery, I knew I didn't have if we were looking at the ACEs score, I didn't have a lot of them, but I just knew from looking at other people like that my story was a little bit easier, but I still had, a pretty intense addiction, and I was going to die if I didn't do something about it. So I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to follow this path. And thank goodness I did. But it's still, I can still see those when they're breaking down little ones or not little ones, but smaller aspects of, with your a parent with mental health issues. So I might have not looked at it then, or my clients might not look at their depressed parent as because there wasn't suicide attempts or something like that. But it opens up the doorway to talk about how our trauma affects us.
Right.
So, yeah, I
Yeah,
just wanted
and
to
it,
put that in.
yeah, no, that just made me think of that, like for me, yeah, mine is high, but one of the things on the questions was, did you ever feel like no one loved you and your family? And I always felt loved. We had all of this crazy stuff going on, but there was love there, and so for
Right.
me, that was important. Whereas, I know a couple of people who are also within the rooms, that had a pretty great upbringing, that all of their needs were met. They went to good schools. Their parents were attentive and stuff, but they didn't actually feel like the emotional love that I felt from my family. So it's like we were messed up, but we loved each other, and so is there one that's better than the other? Well, no, I think they could all lead to addiction or less healthy coping mechanisms, I guess.
Right. Some maladaptive behaviors.
There
Yeah.
we go. That's what
We've
I'm trying to say.
been, yeah, that's I guess my work jargon, but we've been, in my agency, we've been, training more on, internal family systems, but then also, another, evidence supported, not evidence based treatment right now, but it was called instinctual trauma response. And I'm not a therapist, so I don't do it with people, but I've had the training. And their theory is that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and not these long term neglects, but that when going back and we're processing the trauma and then putting an end to it helps the left side of your brain understand that it's ended. So some of the trauma responses that come up, those fight or flight, or where we're triggered by a smell or driving down the street, that we're able to, that our brain can know, that we're not back in that old trauma, that it's ended, and that we can, we now have another toolbox to use. And so it's a lot of the same terminology that we use in AA, but
Right.
so yeah.
Very cool.
Well, thank
Anyway,
you.
thanks for letting me call in.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Michelle. So nice to hear from you. I
Love
appreciate
listening
it.
to you guys.
Oh, this is a lot of fun. Thank
Yeah.
you. I've learned a lot too from this podcast and from reading the article and talking to you guys. I never really thought, I don't really think too much about the topic. I mean, I thought about it when I was going through the steps and it made sense to me. But when you read about it from like a therapeutic point of view or scientific point of view, it really does kind of make sense to me, So thank you everybody for your comments in the chat room and by calling in. And Angela, thank you for helping me understand this. I'm amazed that we were able to fill an hour, but we did it. I think we did a pretty good job. Thanks to
I'm not.
our listeners.
I figured that we'd have quite a few people calling in. This is
Oh,
the
wow.
hot topic.
I guess so. Yeah.
In recovery.
I do remember
right
one
now.
time when we made someone made a post about it on our Facebook group, and it was kind of controversial because people said, "Oh, trauma has nothing to do with addiction and whatever." So and maybe,
Yeah. So it can be. So I guess it depends on which group is talking about it at the time. But I love talking about this, and I hope we did it a little bit of justice. But again, it's just an introduction to the idea, and there are a lot of resources out there for people. So if you need some additional one, or if something we talked about triggered something in you, please post in the Facebook group or get a hold of us so that we can give you some resources, people that you can talk to, or help you find somebody in your community that you can get some more information and help from.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for listening once again. I do appreciate it. Thank you for calling in. Thank you for your comments in the chat room. It's just wonderful. We've had some really intelligent comments today, and I appreciate that. It's interesting how this is just so much fun. It's like an AA meeting. It's like, we can talk about some serious topics. We can talk about trauma from our past, And I don't know, but it's kind of odd. We can still laugh and we can still enjoy being together. So
Right.
that's what I love about AA. So anyway, thanks again for listening to another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. And we're not hurting for money right now, but if you would like to support AA Beyond Belief, the podcast, and our website, we would appreciate it. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. And just making small donations, even $1 a month, is really appreciated. And you can do that through our Patreon page at patreon.com/AA Beyond Belief. You can also donate at PayPal, paypal.me/AA Beyond Belief, or simply by going to our website, aabeyondbelief.org, and there's a donate button you can click on. And we've had recently quite a few people join the Patreon I don't know, club, whatever you call it. And it has really been helpful. So thank you very much for that. So we'll be back again next week for another sober distancing episode. The pandemic continues and we're staying sober somehow. So we'll be back. Thank you, Angela. It's been great talking to you again.
Yeah, you too. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.